Did you know there's a reason some wartime manuals were never printed for public eyes? In the final years of World War II, both Allied and Axis forces realized they had created something that crossed an invisible line, not with firepower, but with fear. These weren't explosives, gas, or even electrical devices. They were traps, mechanical, primitive, and devastatingly efficient. So effective, in fact, that entire sections of military field manuals were later burned or blacked out. Among those forgotten designs, one stood out, a crude yet genius mechanism called the Step Snare. The Step Snare wasn't built in a lab or a military base. It was born from desperation in occupied territories like Poland, France, and the Balkans, where resistance fighters had no access to modern weapons. They needed something to protect their caches, slow enemy patrols, and buy precious seconds to escape. What they invented turned the very earth beneath a soldier's boots into a silent weapon. It wasn't fancy. It didn't explode or flash. It simply waited, hidden in plain sight. The design was deceptively simple. Imagine a shallow pit, maybe a foot deep, covered with a lattice of thin branches and camouflaged with leaves and a thin layer of dirt. Beneath that layer stood a sharpened stake, usually made from hardwood and hardened in fire. When someone stepped on the trap, the cover would collapse just enough for their foot or leg to drop and drive onto the angled stake below. The injury often wasn't fatal, but that was the point. A wounded soldier screamed. Others stopped to help. Suddenly, an entire patrol's movement halted, and fear spread faster than bullets. What made the Step Snare so terrifying wasn't its lethality, but its psychology. Soldiers trust the ground beneath them. When that trust is shattered, the mind follows. After the first encounter with one of these, entire patrols began to hesitate. Every step felt suspicious. Every patch of dirt seemed to hide something deadly. Even if only one trap existed in a square mile, it forced men to move slower, break formation, and constantly second-guess their environment. Commanders realized this tiny, handmade contraption could hold back entire units, not through strength, but through uncertainty. By 1947, after the war, Allied engineering handbooks quietly removed any mention of step snares, spike pits, or similar devices. They were officially labeled inhumane and unfit for modern warfare. But the truth ran deeper. They weren't just gruesome. They were too effective. The idea that soldiers could lose trust in the very ground they walked on was a psychological contagion the military did not want spreading. So the blueprints were buried, the manuals sanitized, and the Step Snare faded into legend. Every trap, from ancient times to modern warfare, relies on two universal human instincts. People trust the ground beneath them, and people follow the path of least resistance. The Step Snare weaponized those instincts. It didn't look like danger. It looked like safety. And that's what made it so unstoppable. Decades later, those same principles resurfaced, but in survival and homesteading manuals, this time stripped of violence and turned into strategy. You see, terrain can be shaped not to harm, but to control movement. If you create a perimeter of uneven or noisy terrain, like gravel, dry leaves, or brittle twigs, you make a silent approach impossible. If you guide paths through choke points, lighted areas, or visual bottlenecks, you can observe every approach safely. In essence, modern defensive landscaping is the ethical evolution of a wartime trap. It's not about injury, it's about awareness and control. Those resistance fighters didn't have access to industrial materials. They studied nature, its patterns, textures, and camouflage. They learned to match the color of the soil, layer moss, and debris, and understand how erosion shaped the land. Their greatest weapon wasn't wood or rope, it was observation. Today, that same skill translates directly into survival and preparedness. If you can blend your shelter, your supplies, or your gear into your environment seamlessly, if nothing looks new or out of place, you've already mastered the art those fighters relied on. After 1945, archives in Britain and the United States purged almost all references to improvised traps and devices. Entire sections of field manuals disappeared under restricted use. But veterans, especially field engineers and commandos, quietly passed on the knowledge that mattered. Not how to harm, but how to think. How to see the land as a tool, not just a backdrop. That mindset, turning limitation into advantage, became the foundation of modern survivalism. By the Cold War, those erased principles resurfaced under new names: terrain denial, environmental control, and defensive design. The step snare was gone, but its spirit survived. Today, search and rescue teams use the same logic in reverse, marking stable ground, guiding movement, and preventing injury. It's the exact same concept, just flipped from destruction to protection. In truth, the line between a deadly trap and a safe trail lies only in intent. The same knowledge that once inflicted fear can now build safety. The physics of pressure, balance, and motion, those principles haven't changed. Only how we use them has. Understanding that line, the boundary between survival and cruelty, is what turns old warcraft into ethical fieldcraft. The story of this erased World War II trap isn't about glorifying violence. It's about rediscovering ingenuity, the power to adapt, observe, and reshape your surroundings. Those forgotten engineers and fighters didn't rely on gadgets or high-tech tools. They relied on awareness, patience, and the ability to read the ground beneath them. And in any survival scenario, from the wilderness to your own home, that same truth holds. If you can control the terrain, you can control the situation. The step snare may have been erased from the manuals, but its lessons still echo in the soil, on every battlefield, and along every trail we walk. Because history doesn't just record what we've done, it hides what we were never meant to remember. If you believe forgotten knowledge still holds power, subscribe to our channel and join the search for history's lost survival secrets. Thanks for watching.